Well, good morning again. I'm Mindy Crawford. I'm the Executive Director of Preservation Pennsylvania, and I want to thank you so much for joining us for today's Pennsylvania at-risk announcement. I really think that this was sort of a bonus of the pandemic because we've all become so comfortable with Zoom that it turns out that this is a perfect way to announce a statewide list instead of being at just one location. So I'm glad that you are all able to join us, and I think we should just go ahead and get started. You may, if you're a regular fan of the Pennsylvania at-risk list, you may notice this is a little later this year. We did make a decision. Normally we announce it in January or February, but decided that this was the perfect thing to do for Preservation Month. So happy Preservation Month, and let's get started. While I wasn't actually involved at Preservation Pennsylvania back at the beginning of the at-risk program, I have always heard a story about the beginning of the program. Former Senator Jim Furlow was a passionate preservationist, and he was so distressed by the threatened demolition of the Syria Mosque in Pittsburgh that he chained himself to one of the large lions outside the building, and he was arrested. I've often asked groups that I speak to how many in the room have ever chained themselves to a bulldozer, and generally no one raises their hand. So Jim's story is one that has always given me a little thrill. I myself have never chained myself to a lion or a bulldozer. The loss of this building was the catalyst for Preservation Pennsylvania to establish the at-risk list in 1992. Each year, we solicit nominations for inclusion in the list. Historic resources are not saved just because we list them. They are saved because many people and factors come together, usually at the local level, that change the situation. However, we know that putting a statewide focus on some of these sites and buildings has made a complete difference in their outcome. In 2012, our 20th year of the list, we physically visited each site that had been listed since 1992. Surprisingly, some of the sites that we thought were lost not only turned out to still be standing, but many had been rehabilitated and were enjoying a new and vibrant life. Of course, we have lost too many, and some of the outcomes were a little less than we hoped. But in the end, the numbers support our belief that this list can make a difference with over 46% saved or partially saved. And the still at risk number is also important because, as you'll find out today, we are going to happily report that one of our 1992 sites is now saved almost 30 years later. So with the perspective of almost 30 years, we've been able to categorize the type of threats that we generally encounter. One thing that is very interesting is that in places where development pressure is strong, especially in strong real estate markets, the threat is demolition because people want to build new things. They want to build bigger things and they want to get the old things out of the way. Conversely, where there's a weak local economy, what you have are lots of vacant and abandoned buildings, lots of deferred maintenance, and eventually physical deterioration that can lead to demolition. So it's interesting when we did some work around the state to find out that, two communities that were relatively close together, one with a strong economy and one with a weak economy, were having very different kinds of at-risk properties. Financial capacity is always the issue. There's never enough money. And so many owners who love their buildings, especially nonprofit organizations, and it's very hard to raise money to maintain a building. Paying for a new roof is not a very sexy thing to raise money for, but it's probably the most important thing you can do for a building. Another concern is the lack of local tools. There are, we have quite a number of ordinances. We have quite a number of HARB districts that are sort of working, that work together to save sites. But unfortunately, many of these tools aren't really strong enough, or in many cases, they're not being followed completely. And so a lot of times we deal with issues where it's the lack of either local support or an ordinance or even zoning and other issues where preservation goals are not in line with what's happening. The other is functional obsolescence. And, there are so many large estates that have been for sale, former convents, former schools, former colleges, things that aren't really being able to be used in the way that they were originally. This ends up with properties being taken apart, inappropriate alteration, deterioration, lack of maintenance, and eventually demolition. And site control, which is the most important thing, because site control is everything. If there's a reluctant owner and no willingness to negotiate, there's very little that can be done. We always say that the first thing and the most important thing is to get site control. Unfortunately, going out and preemptively buying everything that you think might be eventually at risk is not a very successful way to work the process. So before we get into this year's list, I want to give you some updates. These are updates that have happened since we announced our last list in February 2020. The Meadows Road Bridge was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2020. The 4-span Stone Arch Bridge was built in 1858. It's the oldest multi-span Stone Arch highway bridge that is still extant in Northampton County. These are rare, and this is the last remaining example in the county and one of only 5 remaining in the state. Unfortunately, deterioration has continued, and it appears likely that the county will replace rather than restore this bridge. Advocates have suggested that past repairs contributed to the bridge's deterioration, such as the use of modern cement instead of a compatible mortar mix. Any loss of a stone bridge, or any bridge really that you care about, feels very personal because it's local. It's the bridge you go over every day. It's the bridge that you take photos by or you hike by. And so when you lose one locally, it's really, really hard to do. While we had hoped for a different outcome here, unfortunately, that does not seem to be possible. These 3 historic properties in the First Side Historic District in Pittsburgh are under threat of demolition for new development. Most recently, the Planning Commission denied the demolition request from the developer, but he has filed an appeal to this denial. He was granted permission to demolish a separate 6-story building with an emergency permit license inspections department approval. Local advocates have really stepped up here and made their voices heard. While the outcome is not known yet, and this is still a fairly lengthy battle ahead, the fact that people in the community have continued to show up at meetings and provide letters has definitely what has kept these buildings standing so far, and hopefully there'll be a more positive outcome. This is the kind of announcement we hate to make because you don't like to save things twice. But this beautiful farming community in Dutch Corner in Bedford County was threatened by a wind project in 2010, and the local advocates worked really hard to fight this proposal. The project was terminated in 2012, and we recognized the Dutch Corner Historical Society with our Grassroots Advocacy Award that year. Unfortunately, this site is at risk again. The Competitive Power Ventures Kettle Wind Project proposes to build wind turbines on the ridge of Evetts Mountain. Construction and operation of these turbines would permanently impact the landscape. This is one of Bedford County's most significant economic assets. The local advocates are at it again and have asked Bedford Township supervisors to update the municipality's antiquated wind energy ordinance. It was enacted in 2010 based on a 2006 state ordinance model. The requested changes would affect the setbacks for non-participating landowners and historic properties, preclude siting turbines within the National Register Historic District or any designated natural or wildlife area, such as the Dunning Mountain Forest Natural Heritage Area, and would require the company to conduct studies for any proposed project, including potential impacts on environmental protection, scenic views, noise, shadow flickers, and property values. Residents are alarmed about the environmental impacts, including the anticipated flattening of the steep slope of the ridge so that the wind turbines can be sited, and the related impact on the watershed. If you want to learn more about this and would like to make some effort to reach out to the Bedford Township supervisors, you can check out our blog in our news section. We do have a bit of a longer update on this project. This property in York County was threatened with demolition and was added to our list last year. This is the Strickland Farmhouse, dates back to one of the earliest settler families of the area. We met with the York County Commissioner shortly after it was listed. They are the owners of the property. Although you can't tell in this photograph, this property sits very close to the county prison, in fact, is on county land. And if you would happen to try to go by and take a look at this, it is very well guarded with cameras, and eventually you will have some prison guards coming over to check out what you're doing. The challenge with this site is that because it is so close to the prison and access is right near the prison, it's going to be difficult to find someone to use the property for a couple of reasons. Because one, because the access is so difficult. Two, it does need a lot of rehabilitation work. And three, the county is not interested in selling it because of its proximity to the prison. They would be interested in maybe providing or helping to provide a secondary access to the site so that it would be further away from the entrance to the prison. So there's also a family cemetery here, very early cemetery that sits between the house and the prison. To date, we have not identified an owner, a tenant who would be willing to occupy the building. But the news about its impending demolition did result in some descendants of the original owners learning about the property for the first time. So the siblings that you see in this photo are 7th great grandchildren of Ulrich Strickler, who came to America in 1737, settled in York County, and built the farmhouse with his wife. The descendants met here last July 2020, for professional family portraits that they shared with us. So if you know of a great use for it, please let us know or let the county commissioners know. Preservation Pittsburgh has really been the local advocate, continuing to work to try to save this beautiful historic building. Unfortunately, the building was not maintained, resulting in safety concerns that make, unfortunately, demolition unavoidable. As part of the ongoing discussions, preservation compromise has been reached. Preservation Pittsburgh is currently in the process of signing a memorandum of understanding with the University of Pittsburgh, in which they would carefully dismantle the facade of the Croatian Fraternal Union, catalog and store it during construction of a new science building on the site. And upon completion of the new building, the facade's architectural details will be reinstalled on site to make a unique courtyard between the historic facade and the new building. We call this a partial save. I mean, while it isn't the ideal situation, it is definitely better than losing all evidence of this important building. Some progress at last on the John Coltrane House. After the house was added to the list in 2020, we spoke with the owner and the staff in City Councilman Darrell Clark's office to discuss the legal ownership issues and the complexities in trying to preserve this property. Not a whole lot happened during, at that time, but in early May of this year, the Strawberry Mansion Community Development Corporation announced that they were working with the property owner and completed a feasibility study that was funded by a grant from the Community Design Collaborative of Philadelphia. It included a structural assessment and conceptual designs created by Kelly Maiello Architects. According to the statement, they want to expand the footprint of Coltrane's jazz legacy beyond his former home by also preserving the adjacent houses along the residential row. However, the status of the properties on either side of the Coltrane house still possess a potential threat. The building that you can see on the right-hand side, just a corner of the yellow building, is going to be demolished, as is the right-hand side of this duplex. So the Coltrane house is the left-hand side, and it will be standing without the other half of its twin. And as part of the site, the 3 row houses on the left-hand side of the Coltrane house did have a pretty terrible fire earlier. And as a result of that, that is also very precarious. Still, it's the closest that we've come to hearing some positive news, and hopefully this announcement is still cause for optimism, and we applaud the group for their continuing efforts to work to save this really important house of John Coltrane. When we placed the Mifflin House on the at-risk list in 2017, we started with a 2-pronged approach to this issue. On the one hand, we helped organize fundraisers and public meetings and attended township hearings, paid for legal counsel to challenge the efforts to demolish the Mifflin House and to develop the remaining portion of the 18th century farmstead. It was proposed to be demolished to make way for a very large expansion to an existing warehouse facility that is on another portion of the land. At the same time, we also reached out to the developer and the owner to see if we could come up with a compromise. We knew that the community really appreciated the value of this property. It's beautiful property, open space, as you can see from the overview, quite close to the Susquehanna River. And it's got a very significant Underground Railroad story that most people don't even know. So we worked hard, to get it protected and to find a way forward. I called on our friends at the Susquehanna National Heritage Area and the Conservation Fund, both of whom worked with us on saving camp security quite a few years ago. In February 2019, the developer agreed to give us 2 years to find a way to identify a new owner and preserve the property. Working together, the plan surprisingly came into a workable concept. And today we're cautiously optimistic that the Susquehanna National Heritage Area will very soon be announcing this exciting project and plans to acquire and preserve the site and develop it into the new Susquehanna National Heritage Area Visitor Center. So stay tuned. It's not official yet, but we're feeling really positive about it. This is the property I referred to earlier. The East Broad Top Railroad was placed on our national register, was placed on the at-risk list in 1992, and it is finally saved. The new foundation that has acquired the railroad last year is beginning an extensive master planning process that will consider how to use this National Historic Landmarks assets effectively, what its immediate and long-term needs are, and how it can help boost local and regional tourism and prosperity. At the announcement on Valentine's Day 2020, one of my very last site visits before the pandemic, the excitement was tremendous, with so many people in attendance to hear the wonderful news. East Broad Top is a 33-mile narrow gauge railroad built from 1872 to 1874. Narrow gauge railroads were easier to grade than standard gauge, which is very important in a terrain with a lot of curves and hills. The railroad originally brought iron ore and coal to the iron furnace that gave its name to the current borough of Rock Hill Furnace. The iron furnace closed in the early 1900s, but the market for clean burning broad top coal remained robust until after World War II. The EBT was shuttered when the mines closed in 1956 and was sold to the Kovalchik family, operators of a salvage company. Instead of scrapping the line, in 1960, the Kovalchiks reopened 4 miles of it as a tourist railroad powered by the same steam locomotives that had hauled coal for decades. This is also the site of my 3rd grade field trip when I lived in Lewistown, and we went to the East Broad Top Railroad. The rest of the railroad remained undisturbed, including the circa 1910 machine shops, a rare example of early 20th century American industrial facility and the core of the East Broad Top's 1964 designation as a National Historic Landmark. Because it's a narrow gauge railroad, their shops are super important because narrow gauge is not the standard gauge anymore, and very few narrow gauge railroads exist. So almost anything that has to be repaired has to be done in the shop. East Broad Top employees are currently overhauling the track to Picnic Grove, rebuilding 2 steam engines from 1912 and 1916, stabilizing and adding fire protection to structures, and making safety and accessibility improvements throughout the property. Beginning in June 2021, the railroad will run a regular schedule of trains for the first time since 2011, as well as offering tours of the machine shop complex. For more information about this, please visit the railroad's website, which is eastbroadtop.com. Very happy news indeed. The Mount Tabor Church was built by Elias Parker, once an enslaved person in Hagerstown, Maryland, who moved to Mount Holly Springs after serving with the United States colored troops during the Civil War. His granddaughter, Harriet Gumby, is the one who alerted the Heart and Soul Project in Carlisle to this little-known story, church and cemetery. Stabilization, wildlife relocation, and a complicated situation with the ownership, no one actually owned it, marked the first few steps needed to save this church. Mount Holly Springs Borough agreed to accept ownership of it. We recently participated in a virtual spring celebration with the group to celebrate its listing on the National Register of Historic Places under the multiple property documentation form for African American churches and cemeteries in Pennsylvania. The church will also receive a $275,000 grant from the state, from the Department of Economic and Community Development. A project is also underway to use the results from an earlier study with ground penetrating radar in order to place solar powered lights to mark each of the burials in the cemetery. And this project follows a very successful fence project undertaken by an Eagle Scout to mark the cemetery. It does contain the graves of several United States colored troops graves. This project has made tremendous progress thanks to the dedication and hard work, and I mean really hard physical work of many of the people that you see in this photograph. These are people who really cared about this place. It started with the listing of it in the top corner. You can see me holding a little heart there, but all of these folks and many more have stepped up to get the work done here. This is about people who care, stepping up and making a difference, a real success story. And finally, after many years of advocating, the Friends of Abolition Hall, led by Sidel Zove, who is sort of in the center of the picture holding a pink square sign. They worked for 5 years to advocate the saving of this 10.5 acre farmstead and Underground Railroad site in Plymouth Meeting. And this involved right to know requests, a lot of fundraising for legal fees, showing up at every meeting, providing comment, and just keeping your eye on what's going on. And Sidel, she was a regular visitor to the township to get the information. Finally, in July 2020, developer Kay Hovnanian withdrew its proposal to build 67 townhouses on the site, much to the surprise of the committed volunteers. But what was going to happen next? The outlook is brighter than we could expect following a unanimous decision in April by the White Marsh Township supervisors to enter into an agreement with the heirs to purchase this property. A gift from a private donor will be coupled with township open space funds to acquire the property in partnership with the nonprofit White Marsh Arts Center. A site with important anti-slavery and Underground Railroad history will be saved, and the Hovenden arts legacy at the site will carry on. A very exciting success story. So this year, 2021, we received 11 nominations representing 9 counties. We convened a committee of statewide partners to review them. We selected 5 for inclusion this year, and then we had 2 positive outcomes before the listing. So we are actually announcing just 3 this year. The cover of the publication that should be arriving soon in mailboxes is something to look for, but let's get on with the list. The former St. Agnes Church in Pittsburgh is a work of art on the outside and inside, and is believed to be one of the finest existing examples of the Lombardy Romanesque ecclesiastical designs of Pittsburgh architect John Combs. Combs designed over 24 churches in the Pittsburgh area and is also credited as a leader in the advancement of church design in the early 20th century. Only the best materials were used for the church elements, including marble and granite columns. In 1993, the Catholic Diocese closed St. Agnes Church, rectory, and school. In 1996, Carlow University, formerly Carlow College, purchased the church and rectory. Pews were removed from the church, and some other renovations were made for it to become a multi-purpose center known as the St. Agnes Center. Carlow University campuses include the St. Agnes School, Church, and Rectory, as well as a surface parking lot. As part of their lower campus development, Carlow University plans to partner on a public-private partnership project that would include a long-term land lease to the developer, who would construct a public office building, while Carlow would also construct a building for university use. As the project is currently envisioned, Carlow University would demolish the St. Agnes Church building. This action is supported by the Catholic Diocese of Pittsburgh as a preference to reuse. If the building remains standing, the diocese would require the removal or destruction of all religious iconography, including windows and murals, in the event that the church were converted to a profane use, in quotes. Preservation Pennsylvania is going to partner with Preservation Pittsburgh to make the case for preserving this building and incorporating it into the new development as a marketable asset. Carlow has said that it will try to salvage materials from the church for its reuse. While salvage is preferable to destruction, the loss of these artistic works in their original location is really very disheartening. It's unclear why the works could not remain in place for appreciation by generations to come. St. Baptist Church in Lawrenceville is now the church brew works, with stained glass windows and other decorative details still intact. We have learned that this is standard practice, and with a reference back to canon law, that all of the iconography has to be removed from a building before it is sold. There does appear to be some confusion over the interpretation of this law, and it's one of the things we're definitely going to be checking out to see if we can change the outcome here. The next property is in Bucks County, Satterthwaite House and Patterson Farm. The township of Lower Makefield purchased this farm in 1998 from Thomas and Alice Patterson. A year later, 71 acres were placed under farmland preservation easement. The farm's neighbors formed the group, the Patterson Farm Preservation, formed a group called the Patterson Farm Preservation Group, and lobbied Lower Makefield Township officials for a farm preservation easement for additional acreage. The township voted in October 2018 to grant an agricultural conservation easement to the county on approximately 106 acres, protecting a majority of the farm. The Patterson Farm Preservation Group is now working towards protection of the last 40 acres, which includes all the historic structures. The Quaker Satterthwaite House was built in the 1730s, with later additions in the mid-19th century. To date, the Patterson Farm Preservation Group has served as a conscience for the township and a guardian for the Patterson Farm. At township meetings, they have addressed a variety of mismanagement issues, from the misguided effort to sell off the Satterthwaite House and only have driveway access to the farmland, to the accidental demolition of a recently restored garage apple cellar. The group also exposed illegal discharge of industrial wastewater by the former farm tenant, Bright Farms, leading the PADEP to issue a fine for that violation. The Satterthwaite and its other historic buildings are suffering from 23 years of deferred maintenance by Lower Makefield Township, amounting to demolition by neglect. The township has already attempted to sell off a 5-acre parcel containing the Satterthwaite House. The buyer sought variances to build a commercial venture on the site, which were denied, resulting in years of litigation and ultimately resulting in an end to the sale. For almost a decade, the Patterson Farm Preservation Group has called for proper management and attention to the farm and its historic buildings. Lower Makefield Township is a certified local government, a designation that includes an expectation to adequately maintain municipally owned historic resources. Jointly administered by the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office, each local community works through a certification process to become a recognized certified local government. Once certified, CLGs become an active partner in the Federal Historic Preservation Program, and each community gains access to benefits of the program and agrees to follow required federal and state requirements. That is not happening in this case with this building. Preservation Pennsylvania will work with the nonprofit group Patterson Farm Preservation to find a solution. Their petition for preservation has garnered over 4,000 signatures to date. They seek approval from the township to allow their volunteers to begin restoration work as soon as possible. Our last property to be included is Fort Halifax Park in Dauphin County. The French and Indian War pitted the colonies of British America against those of New France, each side supported by military units from the parent country and by Native American allies. Fort Halifax was one of 3 fortifications erected along the Susquehanna, the others being Fort Hunter in Harrisburg and Fort Augusta in Sunbury. These were part of a chain of fortifications that were built to protect borderland settlers from raiding parties. Colonel William Clapman supervised the construction of Fort Halifax in 1756, using lumber sourced and sawn locally. Built in 2 weeks under guard of an officer and 30 men, the fort was a 160-foot square log stockade with 4 bastions and an earthwork of about 10 feet high, surrounded by a ditch of equal depth. By 1757, the troops were transferred to Fort Hunter, and by 1763, Fort Halifax was abandoned. In 1926, a stone monument was erected along Route 147 to commemorate Fort Halifax. Archaeological research has not yet yielded the exact location of the fort, but efforts will continue in 2021 with a field school on the property. The site of the fort is suspected to be within the boundaries of the Fort Halifax Park property. Joseph and Sarah Geiger owned the property between 1820 and 1888, and it is believed that the farmhouse and barn may have been built between 1820 and 1830. In 1951, Andrew and Sarah Yeager bought the property and adapted the barn for their successful dairy production. The Yeagers had 50 dairy cows and farmed wheat, corn, and oats until 1972 to 73. In 2004, they wished the property be preserved and sold it to the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy. In 2006, Halifax Township took ownership with certain restrictive covenants and expectations in place connected to the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and public funding used for its purchase. Between 2011 and 2016, a cooperative effort between PennDOT, DCNR, and township officials and volunteers conducted some small archaeological investigations at the park. They identified a number of buried features and recovered military and domestic artifacts, including lead balls and handmade nails and spikes that date from the mid-18th century and may be associated with the fort. Recently, the partners of a nonprofit Friends of Fort Halifax Park, Halifax Township, and Juniata College's Cultural Resource Institute, and the veterans organization Team Rubicon has formed to continue the effort to positively identify the location of the fort. And as I mentioned earlier, that will be taking place in June of this year. The threat to this property is that Halifax Township is admittedly a reluctant owner, feeling encumbered by the responsibility and financial burdens of the historic buildings in this park. A long-term management plan expected under the original ownership transfer from the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy was never implemented by the township. The building's maintenance has been neglected, resulting in the insurance carrier dropping coverage. Township turned down funds awarded by Dauphin County to stabilize the historic structures. Instead, it has solicited bids for demolition of the house and barn. Demolition alters the character of the park and threatens the ability to find a new owner and use the rehabilitated buildings as an income-producing venue to assist with the operations of the park. The nonprofit Friends of Fort Halifax was formed to support the township in the daily maintenance, programming, education, and preservation of the park and its historic resources. The Friends has been doing its best to manage and maintain the park and its buildings and has been paying for trail upkeep, gardens, signage, maintenance, programs, lavatory rental, and maintenance by drawing on volunteer assistance, a small membership, donations, small grants, and fundraising. An effort to mitigate insurance liability concerns were contingent on the Friends doing the work and the township paying for the materials. The Friends group has not been permitted to use, enter, maintain, or renovate the barn or farmhouse, and the township only recently agreed to allow them to work on the mid-century Jaeger house. The township has stated that the only way to avoid demolition is to find a new owner who will undertake rehabilitation of the buildings. Preservation Pennsylvania will work in partnership with the Friends of Fort Halifax and the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy, which holds the easement on the land, to try to come to some kind of positive outcome for this site. So these are the 3 sites that we listed this year. The 3 that we listed doesn't mean that the others were not equally important. As we approach this, we have to consider, will elevating this to a statewide level make a difference in its outcome? Sometimes properties need other assistance, which we will continue to provide in our typical technical assistance way. But these 3 properties will now be part of our work plan for the next 12 months, and we'll meet with our partners at each site to work on an action plan. During the first year of listing, we do waive our field services and provide additional services such as letters of support for Keystone Grant Fund applications or finding experts to offer service pro bono. Once a property is placed on the Pennsylvania at-risk list, it remains on the list forever. It is ours forever. No matter whether the outcome is good, bad, or indifferent, it is always on our list, and we try to constantly be aware of what's going on with those properties. I want to put a special thank you out to our review panel. This was the first year that we used such an extensive statewide perspective to review. So we reached out to our friends at all of our statewide organizations associated with history and preservation. And we were hoping when we made the invitation that we'd have at least 4 or 5 people, but all 7 of the groups that we invited participated in the discussion, and they took it very seriously. They had great perspective and gave the time commitment to read through all of the applications and the photographs and the accompanying material, and they came together to make the decision. I want to thank you for those of you who made a donation when you registered for this event. The funds that are raised for at-risk are used to support our work on these properties. If you didn't have an opportunity to make a donation, this link will take you to a site where you can donate, preservationpa.org/donate. And Preservation Pennsylvania members, watch your mailbox in June for the 2021 at-risk publication. And if you're not a member, there's still time to join during Preservation Month and receive our Preservation Pennsylvania decal. Thank you to the 30 new members and donors that we have already received in May. I see there's a few questions in the box, so I will move on to that. I'm sorry, I need to read them first. Okay, this is about Dutch Corner. Okay, so Laura Kai shared that when she reached out about Dutch Corner, that basically they didn't want to hear from someone who wasn't from Bedford County. And this is definitely something that we deal with, and we do try very much to remind local townships or counties that we all care about preservation in Pennsylvania and about our historic resources. And while we might not be voting members of the municipality where the issue is happening, we still do care about the outcome of projects such as this, and that good preservation in one location is good preservation in all locations. And so, Laura, I don't know if this will make a difference, but I would reach out to them and say, we all have a stake in this. The Pennsylvania Constitution tells us that we all have a right to protect to have our resources protected. And I don't think it's, I don't think you can mention that any too often. So this concludes our presentation. Thank you all for joining us. We will be, their press releases have gone out. You'll probably see some information up on our Facebook page and our Instagram, as well as on our website. If you'd like to be involved in any of these, please do reach out to us. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great day, and happy Preservation Month.